Hey everybody, it's Nathan here again for another installment. That's my name, by the way, Nathan. I don't think I've ever said my name on any of these videos, but yeah, that's me. So today we're going to be looking at a lecture Heidegger gave in 1930 called On the Essence of Truth. And it really is, it's one of the ones you have to engage with, I think, to understand Heidegger. Basically, he adds to what he already talked about in Being and Time, as far as truth is concerned, and it carries on quite nicely from what we discussed in the last video, which was a lecture Heidegger gave called "What is Metaphysics?" So yeah, it's a good one. Let's get straight into it. He starts by talking about truth as correspondence and comportment. Well, that's the heading that I've kind of loosely given it. And he begins here by asking, how do we normally talk about truth? What is truth usually? And he wonders maybe it's actual. His example here is gold. So he thinks, is true gold, is that actual gold? Is it something, is it something actual, something real? But then he thinks even false gold, even something that's not real gold, not true gold, is still something actual, still actually exists. So the true isn't the actual. And he comes to conclude that the true is the genuine. So genuine gold, true gold, is what we mean when we talk about gold. It's a correspondence between the meaning that we have in mind and the substance. So true gold is it's a material, it's being that conforms to our idea of what that being should be. So the true is the genuine. That's the first conclusion he draws. But there's another sense in which we use the word true, and this is when we're talking about propositions and things. So there's a relation here between propositions and things themselves. So when the statement accords with the thing. So we have these two senses in which we normally use the word true when we're talking about something genuine, as in a thing that conforms to our understanding of that thing, and the thing as it relates to a proposition we make about that thing. And so ultimately truth is built on accord or correspondence. And Heidegger says truth is the correspondence of the matter to knowledge. And he calls this correctness. So that's what we're going to be running with for the rest of this lecture. Untruth then is the opposite of this. So it's non-correspondence. And that means that it's outside of truth. It's different from truth. So it's the polar opposite of truth. So you have truth on one side, untruth on the other, and that's an important distinction which I'll bring back later on in the video. And he will focus on proposition in the lecture. So he wonders next, how can this statement we have, how can this proposition accord with the thing? How can these two things come into relation? They're completely different, right? We have this proposition which doesn't actually exist anywhere. It's not a thing. It's just language. It's just words, and a real tangible thing. How do these two entities relate to each other? So he says statement presents the object, presents it. And so therefore this object must stand opposed to the statement or the proposition. But to do this, it must, in Heidegger's words, traverse an open field of opposedness. And the openness here is a relating. And it's a relating that Heidegger calls comportment. So comportment is, it's this way in which the thing relates to the statement about that thing. It's kind of like an open, as he says, an open field in which links these two things together. And it may sound a little bit abstract and a little bit, what really? I mean, an open field? What is that? What is he even talking about? Is he talking about anything, or is this all just coming out of the top of his head? And that is, you can have that kind of opinion at first, but I think it's a valid point still. How does that statement, how does a proposition actually relate to a thing? It must relate in some way. And that's all Heidegger's getting at here. It relates through this, but via comportment. I mean, he slaps a word on it. It's still kind of a black box, right? We still haven't described what actually happens, but we have this now kind of framework in our minds of how the statement can relate to the thing, and it does so through this open field that Heidegger calls comportment. Still haven't explained that yet. We've just put a label on it, but again, it's kind of a scaffold for us to get some traction on this whole conversation, on this whole dialogue. So comportment, however, we've got that relation between the two. Comportment is only possible because the thing has already been opened up as such, as a being. So the thing that we're talking about, gold perhaps, the gold comportment can only take place if gold already appears to us as gold, as something. And so that's where Heidegger's going with this. And so this deeper openness, the way that the thing appears to us as a thing, as a being, because it's deeper, it's one level further down, if you like. This is the proper essence of truth. Okay, so hopefully that's cool. The next part we'll move into, or we'll just keep going, I think. So the essence of truth as correctness, is grounded in freedom, Heidegger says next. So we have this idea, truth is correctness, correspondence between the thing and the proposition and the statement, through that open field which he calls comportment. But before we can get to any of that, we have to have, the thing has to reveal itself to us. And the thing is revealed through some other manner. And it's this that we're drilling down to now. And this is the ultimate kind of the more foundational essence of truth. And so this essence of truth, Heidegger says, is grounded in freedom. And then we're like, wait a minute, freedom. So freedom is just our capacity to choose, right? It's an arbitrary kind of subjectivity. Is that what Heidegger's trying to ground the essence of truth in? And the answer is no, because the essence of freedom turns out to be nothing like choice, human choice, or being unrestrained in any way. Freedom is a freeing up of beings so that they may be revealed. And Heidegger calls this a letting beings be. So in that sense, that's why Heidegger is using the word freedom, because it's a freeing up of beings so that they can appear to us as beings. I hope this isn't. I'm not losing people here already, because it seems pretty straightforward from here. Um, if you think of the angle Heidegger is coming from is how do we even know that this gold? How do we even apprehend this gold in the first place? Why is it not just just a random jumble of colours and texture? Why do we apprehend it as gold? That's where Heidegger's going here. And so he says that this only happens through freedom. And freedom as in a freeing up of beings so that they can be revealed as beings. A letting beings be. So an important point with this is that it's not passive. It sounds passive, letting beings be, but it's not. It actually involves an engagement, an active engagement with beings in what he calls this open region. In Greek, it's ta aletheia, which means the unconcealing. So we've got this open region in which beings are engaged with and revealed, disclosed as beings. And this is freedom. This is what freedom is. So if we keep going, we keep looking at freedom a little bit more. Freedom is existent, Heidegger says. And this is existent spelled EK, sistent. So it's a little bit, it's not the EX variation that we're used to. It's this a new word, a new terminology, a new word, existent. And why has he used this? The ek it's a reference to I think it's Greek, and it means standing outside. So we have this notion of freedom as existent, standing outside. What does that mean? It's the way I see it is that freedom doesn't have any kind of meaning in itself. It's not it's not self-contained freedom, the idea of freedom. For freedom to be freedom, it must go outside of itself in this active engagement with others. Sorry, not with others, with beings. To reveal beings as beings, to free them up. So in that sense, it's going outside of itself. And an interesting point I've noted next is that through freedom, or this existent engagement, through freedom, the openness of the open region, i.e. the there, in brackets, da, is what it is. In Dasein, the essential ground, long ungrounded, on the basis of which man is able to exist, is preserved for him. So that's a quote, and it's worth just breaking it down a little bit and looking at it. So through freedom, which is this existent engagement with beings to reveal them as they are, the openness of the open region, and he calls this the there, or da, as in Dasein, right? So this is coming back to a key word in all of Heidegger is Dasein. The there, in the openness of this open region, da is what it is. And in Dasein, and I don't think he's talking about humans here, he's not talking about human beings or consciousness, but in Dasein, the essential ground on the basis of which man is able to exist is preserved for him. So Dasein is not just human being here. Dasein is the open region on which man is able to exist, or on which human beings are able to exist. Again, EK spelling here. So that's interesting because it's the first time I remember seeing that Heidegger refers to Dasein as something other than human beings. First time he uses it in a way that's not a synonym for human existence or human consciousness, the way we normally think about it. So it's the first hint, and we'll get more of this as these videos go on, that Dasein is there's something more going on here than just human existence. So anyway, you've got this Dasein, this openness of the open region, the there, the essential ground on which human beings are able to exist. Again, exist because human beings are also a standing out. There's nothing, what part of what it is to be a human being is to go out of itself towards, well, we'll discuss, we'll see why and how humans exist later. But at this stage, it's just worth noting that human existence is existence, a standing out. So what we have here then is an interesting situation where we see human beings don't possess freedom. We aren't free as in a characteristic of who we are or what we are. Rather, freedom, and this is a quote, freedom, existent, disclosive Dasein, possesses man. So again, we've got this kind of Heidegger's flipping things on us a little bit here. Dasein is not the beginning and the ending. It's not where kind of everything happens. And that's really where Sartre goes with this, I think. He for him, it all does boil down to consciousness, human consciousness, the for itself. But Heidegger's, he's got something different in mind when he says that this freedom, existent, disclosive Dasein possesses man. So we've already got this idea that we're moving in kind of a strange direction. But again, don't think of this as like freedom or this Dasein as some kind of sentient power. There's nothing like that going on here. Just run with it for now. And again, there are so many questions probably popping up for you, but just soak it in. And the more we go through, the more we engage with Heidegger over the next few videos, hopefully some of this stuff will start to fall into place. So anyway, we've got this idea of freedom as this way in which beings appear as beings. Now, I've got a little diagram which hopefully will clarify things. So on the left side there you can see I've just tried to depict the beginning of this video with comportment there being that relation between the statement and the thing. And you've got that comportment is what it is in the sense of an open kind of field that the thing or the statement traverse in order to form that connection, that relation, that correspondence. And on the right side there, I've done something similar with what we've talked about with freedom. So the Dasein there doesn't mean human beings. That Dasein is the open region that we talked about, the openness of the open region through which freedom operates. And in doing so, freedom, which is this freeing up of beings, this letting beings be, this existent engagement with beings, it discloses them as, on the right side, beings, as beings as such. And it does so from beings as a whole, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will get to shortly. So the next section is, I've just called it for myself, Untruth. So we're looking at Untruth next. So we have this idea of freedom as letting beings be, but in that case, if that's what freedom is, freedom can also not let beings be as they are. It can also let them be what they're not. And so this is untruth. And so now we have this idea that freedom can let beings be as they are, truthfully, say, but it can also let beings be, disclose beings, it can also reveal beings as they are not. So what we have here then is this unusual idea that untruth derives from the essence of freedom, untruth derives from freedom. And freedom, if you remember, we already decided or realized was the essence of truth. So untruth comes from the essence of truth. And it does so in what Heidegger calls its non-essence. So the non-essence of the essence of truth, freedom, is untruth. So the idea here is that truth and untruth belong together. If you remember, I said we'd come back to that idea at the beginning. We talked about with comportment and the correctness of statements, that truth, that level of truth as correctness, was completely divorced from untruth as incorrectness. Those two had nothing to do with each other. But now as we drill down a little bit deeper, we see that truth and untruth actually belong together. They come from the same root. They're grounded in the same thing, freedom. And at first it might seem a little bit strange, but if you remember what freedom is just letting beings be. It's that which lets beings be as they are. It's that which lets us apprehend beings at all. Without it, there are no beings. So if you think about it like that, then it's less confusing as to why untruth can be derived from the essence of truth. So this idea that truth and untruth belong together and they come together. This is why Heidegger says true propositions and untrue propositions at that higher level that we're talking about at the beginning. This is why those two can come into opposition with each other. This is how they do that. It's because they have this connection, this deeper connection. And so, again, that's kind of neat. It's kind of tidy. It works pretty well, I think. And it gives a pretty kind of satisfying explanation for how true propositions and untrue propositions can come into opposition. It's a question we don't usually ask, right? How do true propositions and untrue propositions relate to each other? Well, Heidegger's just given us an explanation through freedom, which is the ground of both of them. So they're connected in this deeper truth. And I have another diagram which I'll just quickly put up, and we'll go through this one together. Okay, so on the left-hand side there at the top in that box, we've got correctness or truth, which is that what we were talking about at the beginning, that kind of top level. And on the right side, we also have incorrectness, which is semblance, which I haven't discussed, but semblance is the idea of something not being what it really is, or appearing to be a certain way or a certain thing when in fact it is actually something else. And so this is untruth, where the proposition doesn't match the thing. And both of these are grounded in freedom, which is the essence of truth. Or it's also, as regards untruth, it's the non-essence in the essence of truth. So at any rate, both of those higher level, more superficial, I guess is the way to think about it, truths, truth and untruth, propositional truths and untruths, they're grounded in freedom. And freedom is, as we've already seen, this existent engagement as a disclosive letting be, or again, not letting be, in the case of semblance. And this is the essence of freedom. So hopefully that makes sense. I think I say that every time I show you these. Anyway, let's move on. So we've seen that we have this idea of truth as being merely correspondence, but we've seen that it's not just correspondence. It has a deeper essence in freedom. And untruth as proposition also has this, its essence in freedom, but that's not the, like truth is not merely correspondence. Untruth as untruth also has a deeper level to it, which goes beyond this idea of correspondence. So we're going to look for this deeper essence of untruth next. And on the way we'll talk about attunement, which is something that Heidegger's talked about. He talked about it in Being and Time. We talked about it in the last video as well, What is Metaphysics? And he gives a little bit more information here which may clarify, well, not really, but it's worth running through again. Attunement is basically the way comportment is affected, not as regards beings, individual beings, but towards being as a whole, or beings as a whole. Heidegger uses both of those interchangeably, I think, beings as a whole, being as a whole. So it's the way that we kind of relate to not this or that being, but to all beings. And if you remember in What is Metaphysics, he talked about attunement as profound boredom, or joy, and finally as anxiety. And it's basically the way that we orient ourselves towards beings as a whole. And it's a way through which we can apprehend them as a whole. So it's not feeling or experience, but it is actually the ground of all feeling and all experience, this idea of attunement. And all comportment is attuned, which is to say it's built on this relation that we have with beings as a whole. And that's enough of attunement, I think. I've got one more point to add. The disclosure of individual beings is possible only because we've already been attuned to beings as a whole. So again, that's a crucial point. We can't have freedom, as in this existent engagement with beings that reveals beings, that discloses beings to us, until we are engaged with beings as a whole, beforehand. Okay. But this as a whole, beings as a whole, this is, Heidegger says, incalculable and incomprehensible to ordinary, everyday human existence. Why? Because in the act of letting individual beings be, freedom must also conceal beings as a whole. And this is really the crux here. So we're looking at how individual beings appear to us, how we can apprehend them as beings, as such, as individual beings, as this or that being. And we can only do that because we can only do that when all other beings have been kind of bracketed off, have been concealed, is the word Heidegger uses. But they have to have been kind of distanced. We have to separate ourselves from, we have to separate this individual being from all beings. And if we don't do that, this individual being can't appear in the first place. How can we possibly apprehend this individual being until we have extracted it from beings as a whole? So this freedom, this letting be, is at the same time as it's a letting be, a revealing, a disclosing, it's also a concealing. And as it reveals, as it discloses an individual being, it discloses, it conceals beings as a whole. And that's why this beings as a whole is incalculable and incomprehensible to people who haven't really thought about it in any depth. And this is kind of the neat tie back to what is metaphysics, where Heidegger talked about beings as a whole being annihilated by the nothing generated in anxiety. And I think that that's exactly what he's talking about here. Beings as a whole, they're concealed. And the terminology from what is metaphysics was beings as a whole are annihilated. And the way that this is accomplished is through the nothing generated by anxiety. That was his take on it there. We're looking at it now from a slightly different perspective. And maybe this will turn out to be the same thing. Maybe he'll fudge it in a little bit. But now we're talking about it as this, as what happens in freedom. Freedom is this letting be of beings, and at the same time as it lets beings be, it discloses beings as a whole. So, if we keep going, if truth is disclosedness of freedom, the disclosedness that freedom is, then untruth is undisclosedness. Okay? But since letting be is a concealing, then untruth proper is older than every openedness of this or that being. So we have this untruth proper, the real untruth, that deeper essence that's not just propositional incorrectness, but that deeper essence of untruth that we were looking for is actually older than every disclosing, than every revelation of this or that being. Because before this or that being can exist, we have to disclose, we have to conceal, we have to undisclose, we have to conceal beings as a whole. And this undisclosing, this concealing, is untruth. And it's untruth at a deeper level than merely that incorrectness that we were talking about before. So that is a key point. That's a crucial point. But there's another point that's even more crucial, and that's this concealing, this act of concealment, whereby freedom, letting be, conceals beings as a whole. This is also concealed from us. The fact that beings as a whole have been concealed, that itself, that fact, is concealed. And this Heidegger calls the mystery. And it's what untruth properly is. Again, not incorrectness. That's incorrectness way up here. Now we're down here. We're drilling down to the deeper essence of truth and untruth. And this is what untruth ultimately is. It's bound up with this idea of the mystery, which is the concealing of the concealing. of beings as a whole. And another word that Heidegger throws in here is forgottenness. And in this state of forgottenness, whereby the mystery or the concealing of beings as a whole has been concealed from us, in this state of forgottenness where the mystery kind of reigns, we provide standards without any understanding of their ground or essence. So we think we can provide standards and values and judgments and those kind of things, and we do, but we do so without having any real understanding of how things have come about in the first place. And Heidegger's just pointing that out here, that if we're going to really apply or impose standards and values, we ought to know where these things are coming from in the first place, and we don't even know that. So Heidegger's out to rectify that. So anyway, in this state of forgottenness, which is part of this because of the mystery, we treat beings as if they are open in and of themselves, as if they don't need anything to appear, as if they just magically appear before us. Somehow, in and of themselves, they just appear. Gold just appears as gold. A coin just appears as a coin. And there's nothing at work here. There's nothing deeper. And in treating beings as if they are open in and of themselves, Heidegger calls this insistence as opposed to existence. So existence, again, standing out. There's some kind of engagement. There's a moving outside of itself. Insistence is the opposite. So beings just naturally reveal themselves. There's nothing going on here. It's just, they're just open. We don't have to do anything. Nothing has to happen. Beings are just open for us. This state Heidegger calls insistence. Nevertheless, though, even in insistent existence, we are still in existence. And the quote, I'll give it, and hopefully it's not too confusing verbally, as insistent, man is turned towards the most readily available beings. But he insists only by being already existent. EK. And basically, I think that's not too difficult to understand. We turn towards beings, and in doing so, we think that they are the bottom, that we've reached the bottom. There's nothing further to understand. Beings just are as they are, and there's no need to drill any deeper and try and understand what's going on. It's just that's the bottom. That's what's the word I'm looking for? That's bedrock, if you like. We don't need to go any deeper than that. But even though we're even in our insistence, treating beings as completely open in and of themselves, we are already existent, even though we don't realize it, even though we've forgotten that. So this flight from the mystery towards beings that treats beings as is an insistent existence, Heidegger says is errancy. And this is the counter-essence to the primordial essence of truth, because it opens up an open region for error. Whew. That sounded like a lot of crazy stuff in there. So anyway, I think the only thing that I really want to stress there is turning away from the mystery, paying no attention to it, and just directing your attention to beings in themselves is errancy. And it's basically, it's tied up pretty closely with insistence. So that is pretty much the core of this video. Heidegger also goes on a little bit more to talk about philosophy. He says that, and this is a point which will become much more important later on, history. He talks about history, and so this is not the study of things that have happened already. History, for Heidegger, begins when the first thinker takes a questioning stand with regard to the unconcealment of beings by asking, what are beings? So it's only here, it's only when this deeper, when we kind of look beyond beings, when we try and understand what they are, that's when history begins for Heidegger. That's what kicks history off. And it's because here beings as a whole are asked about for the first time. And this is exactly what the study of philosophy is. He says it's difficult because the essence of truth turns out to contain the non-essence of truth and to in fact be a concealing in that one mystery. Okay, so the last section I have is actually quite long, but let's see how we go. So the essence of truth and the truth of essence. It took me hours and hours and hours to get through. It's really just a small part of the book, but yeah, anyway. So I'll read the quote. I've got a little quote for you and then I'll try and break it down. So the quote is, "Errancy and the concealing of what is concealed belong to the primordial essence of truth. Freedom, conceived on the basis of the insistent existence of Dasein, is the essence of truth, in the sense of the correctness of presenting, only because freedom itself originates from the primordial essence of truth, the rule of the mystery and errancy." So, what on earth does that mean? If we start there are two kind of crucial parts to that, and let's look at the first one first. So errancy and the concealing of what is concealed belong to the primordial essence of truth. So the primordial essence of truth is this deeper understanding of the one mystery. That's where everything kind of grounds from. That's the beginning. That's the core. This mystery, the concealing of the concealing of beings as a whole. So I think that's okay. That's the primordial essence of truth. It's errancy and it's concealing of what is concealed. So freedom, which we've seen as this letting be of beings, the freedom is the essence of truth, right? The essence of truth as propositional correctness. But it can only be that because that freedom itself is grounded in the primordial essence of truth. It's grounded in that mystery, that concealing of the concealing of beings as a whole. So again, it's just everything funnels back down to that mystery. And I've got another diagram which I'll flick up quickly, and we'll run through. Okay, so this diagram is actually basically the same as the one the last one I showed, but I've added a couple of extra things in blue. So again, you've got the propositional level, correctness and incorrectness, truth and untruth at the top, grounded in freedom, which is the essence of truth. And then this is grounded in that disclosive letting beings be, which is truth. But we've seen that letting beings be is also a concealing of beings as a whole. And that's untruth. So we have those two things happening together at the same time, if you like. And then what's even more prior, if you like, more primordial, is this one mystery which is where the concealing of beings as a whole is concealed itself. And this is the kind of where Heidegger stops. It could be a little bit confusing here, because it looks like the way I've drawn it, the one mystery on the bottom is like it happens first, and then the concealing of beings as a whole, disclose of letting beings be, happens next. But it's not. This isn't a temporal diagram. It doesn't describe what happens in terms of, in a chronological sense. It's more like, if you think about, so I thought about how I could draw this actually. If you have disclose of letting beings be, that can't happen until the one mystery, until this mystery's been covered up. That's part of what is needed before beings can be revealed in the first place. So that's why I've put it down there. Even though it's, if you were trying to think about how this would play out in time, it wouldn't work like that. And it's not the way to think about it either. Actually, this isn't how things happen in chronological kind of pattern, in the chronological ordering. So I think, don't get confused by that. This is just a depiction of what's more foundational. And the most foundational thing here for Heidegger is this mystery, this concealing of the concealing. Because without that, nothing else can happen. It's the root of everything. Without this mystery, nothing can be concealed anyway. Everything and nothing can be disclosed. Then freedom doesn't work. There is no propositional truth or untruth either. So that's how I've tried to make some sense of it. And this final, the bottom point there, the one mystery, this is the proper non-essence of truth, or what Heidegger also calls the primordial essence of truth. And hopefully that explains that earlier quote I read to you. So we come back to the final part here, really, which is where Heidegger says the question of the essence of truth arises from the question of the truth of essence. And in that, so the way to think about this is to break it into two: essence of truth, truth of essence. So in that first part, essence means whatness. It's like what something is. And truth is that characteristic of knowledge, correctness. So the essence of truth, and then we've got the truth of essence. So here, essence is, and this is quite confusing. Heidegger talks about it as in this essence, being, but it's being spelt with a Y, B-E-Y-N-G. Being is thought as the difference that holds sway between capital B, being, and beings. So he doesn't go into any detail about this being with a Y, and it's quite difficult to see what he's getting at. Perhaps it's something like that by which being allows itself to be known as beings. Perhaps the essence of being, that's what I'm wondering, the essence of capital B, being. But anyway, it's a little bit unclear at this stage. We will come back to this B-E-Y-N-G, being, later. But Thomas Sheehan, anyway, there's a book I read by Thomas Sheehan recently, and he says he thinks all of these words as B-E-Y-N-G, they all end up meaning the same thing. They're all Heidegger's kind of, he's probing at the moment in 1930. He's probing for what he's for his answer, for his solution to being. And in that probing, we're seeing it kind of play out in front of our eyes, and as he's doing it, he's kind of stumbling himself. So this idea of B-E-Y-N-G, being, at any rate, it's definitely something at a deeper level. So the essence in the second part, the truth of essence, is not just whatness. It's not just what something is. It has a deeper meaning, something to do with the difference between being, capital B, being, and beings. So let's just run with it as that. And truth in the second half of that sentence signifies the sheltering that clears. And he says this is the basic characteristic of capital B, being. So I think here he's kind of slipping this idea in that the sheltering that clears is some kind of disclosing. He's talking about some kind of disclosive event here. And that's why he can use the word truth, because we've seen that truth isn't just propositional, but it's also disclosive. It's more fundamentally disclosive. So the two truths in the first and the second half of that earlier quote, they're not referring to the same thing, and neither are the two essences in that quote. So the question of the essence of truth, the whatness of correctness, arises from the question of the truth of essence, which gets down to this idea of the sheltering that clears and this being with a Y. And it's worth spending a little bit of time on what the sheltering that clears is. And a quote Heidegger gives here is, because sheltering that clears belongs to it, being appears primordially in the light of concealing withdrawal. The name of this clearing is aletheia. Aletheia is that Greek word for unconcealing. So it seems like Heidegger's saying something like being with a capital B, being is ultimately an unconcealing, presumably of beings, or aletheia, unconcealing, or the sheltering that clears. So we have here this idea of sheltering that clears is a characteristic of being itself. And it's an unconcealing. And as an unconcealing, it doesn't and can't appear as something like a being for us, as something we can grasp, or as something we can apprehend even intellectually. Rather, it appears as a concealing withdrawal. So being itself, which has this characteristic of the sheltering that clears, just by its nature, because of what it is, it doesn't appear to us. That's what I get from this little section. We can't understand being in the same way that we understand beings, because being can never be an object for us that we can analyze, think about, that we can grasp in understanding. Rather, it's this concealing withdrawal, a sheltering that clears, and unconcealing. That's what it is. And there's nothing there to grasp. There's nothing there for us to make an object out of, which we can then think about. But it's precisely in the way that it doesn't appear that we can get some purchase on it. And that's that section. Let me leave it there. It's very difficult to explain and it's very difficult to understand. Anyway, I'll leave that as it is. The last part, really the denouement of the lecture here, is this sentence: the essence of truth is the truth of essence. That's what Heidegger's kind of been building towards this whole time. The essence of truth is the truth of essence. And basically what he means here is the sheltering that clears is, i.e., lets essentially unfold accordance between knowledge and beings. So in other words, this whole thing boils down to truth as accordance, as proposition, as correctness, is founded on a deeper truth, namely the sheltering that clears, which is concerned with being itself, which is concerned with unconcealing, and that concealment of beings as a whole, and the further concealment of that concealment. So anyway, that's the final point. Heidegger does make a couple of last points. How many times am I going to tell you that? This is the last point. This is the last point. This is really the last point. He says the meaning of the truth of capital B being, and not merely of beings, remains intentionally undeveloped. So he's saying that we haven't gone the whole way yet. And we're still on the path of metaphysics. But he has made a start. He's made an opening through which we can, and through which he will, try and get out of metaphysical thinking and go beyond to really understand what being itself is. And that, I think you have to remember that with Heidegger and with everything we talk about, he's always looking to answer that question, what is being? And so everything that he talks about is geared towards that. And he thinks we need to get out of metaphysical thinking, which is thinking in terms of beings, or the sum of beings. We need to go beyond this in order to understand the question that he grappled with his whole life. So that is, that's the end. Hopefully that clears something up on the essence of truth. I think it's an important text to grapple with and get your head around, and a lot of the ideas in there, I think, will resurface later and in later videos. So anyway, hopefully that made some sense. Thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. By the way, all of the my notes that I make on this, they come from summaries that I've made of the actual lectures or the actual texts, and they're all on my website, absurdbeing.com. So if you want to get see what I'm kind of talking about in a bit more depth, a bit more detail, these summaries are all available on my website. Check them out if you want. Otherwise, thanks for listening. Hope this helped. Making it helped me. Let me say that. It helped me understand anyway. But anyway, thanks a lot, and I'll see you next time.